there a lighter? Yes. Thank you. Zeta, okay. Yes. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Corpus Christi. I am Robert Allen, your choir director, and I will be serving as your worship associate this morning. Whether you have been with us on Sundays for decades, years, months, or visiting for the first time today, we welcome you to this service. This congregation is a theologically diverse religious community with participation open to all who agree to live within our principles, mission, and covenant. We are a welcoming congregation to the people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, races, ethnicities, and abilities, and we unconditionally welcome you as your full, authentic selves to our community of caring and intent to grow as spiritual and moral beings. This week, we only have a couple announcements. This Saturday, Tacos Not Bombs will be meeting up here for sandwich making. I believe that is at 9 o'clock in the morning. And Laura Walcott is your contact for that. Also, today, the UU Gamers Group will be meeting at 2 o'clock. Unless anybody has anything else, I think we're okay. All right. It is our custom in this church to offer visitors and newcomers a chance to introduce themselves if they feel comfortable doing so. If it's your first time here or you just feel ready to say hello after coming for a while, we invite you to stand as you are able or raise your hand to tell us your name and where you are from. Are there any visitors or newcomers here today who would like to introduce themselves? All right, we've got one. For the online.
I'm David from San Antonio.
Welcome. Anybody else this morning?
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm here with Jonathan Brotzman, and you've been seeing me a lot, but now I live in Corpus, so you'll be seeing me all the time.
Welcome. All righty. Our service will now begin. This week's sermon is based on the premise that UUs are likely to engage in utilitarian decision-making. It appears that focus on the likely consequences of our decisions associated with utilitarianism fits nicely with the tendencies of UUs to be knowledgeable, reasonable, and objective when making decisions. The reliance on utilitarian decision-making by UUs probably also represents a rejection of decision-making based on absolute rules such as it is wrong to tell a lie. UUs likely to realize that while such rules should usually be followed, they also recognize that depending on consequences, lying under some circumstances can be ethically justified. While utilitarian decision-making is usually an effective approach, it does have a dark side that needs to be considered and addressed. Today's sermon will look at utilitarian decision-making and the need to address unintended consequences that can arise because of its use. By dealing with these unintended consequences, the accuracy of one's moral compass can be enhanced. Our opening words today by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. He is rich who owns the day, and no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and sincerely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. The new day is too dear, with its hopes and invitations, to waste a moment on yesterday. I would like to invite Zeta up to light our chalice. We light this chalice in the spirit of peace, devotion, and growing together spiritually. Sorry, a lot of back and forth today. Please rise in body and spirit for our for the recitation of our covenant. Covenant.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human needs to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus we covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred.
I saw her today at the reception, a glass of wine in her hand. I knew she was gonna meet her connection. At her feet was a footloose man. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Oh yeah. I went down to the demonstration to get my fair share of abuse, singing we're gonna vent our frustration
You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want.
But if you try sometimes, well, you just might find
You get what you need, oh yeah. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want.
But if you try sometime, you just might find
You get what you need, oh yeah.
I saw her today at the reception. In her glass was a bleeding man. She was practiced at the art of deception. Well, I could tell by her blood-stained hands.
You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want.
But if you try sometimes, you just might find
You get what you need, oh yeah.
you get what you need. Oh.
You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want.
Today's story is called The Empty Pot by Demi. And after the story, if the children will please join me in RE, those at Young at Heart can join us too. So, up to you.
Welcome back. So today is such a special day because I get to share with you one of my favorite books, and it's titled The Empty Pot. So let's go ahead and check it out. The Empty Pot, written and illustrated by Demi. A long time ago in China, there was a boy named Ping who loved flowers. Anything he planted burst into a bloom. Up came flowers, bushes, and even big fruit trees, as if by magic. Everyone in the kingdom loved flowers too. They planted them everywhere, and the air smelled like perfume. The emperor loved birds and animals, but flowers most of all, and he tended his own garden every day. But the emperor was very old. He needed to choose a successor to the throne. Who would his successor be, and how would the emperor choose? Because the emperor loved flowers so much, he decided to let the flowers choose. The next day a proclamation was issued. All the children in the land were to come to the palace. They would be given special flower seeds by the emperor. Whoever can show me their best in a year's time, he said, will succeed me to the throne. This news created great excitement throughout the land. Children from all over the country swarmed to the palace to get their flower seeds. All the parents wanted their children to be chosen emperor, and all the children hoped that they would be chosen too. When Ping received his seed from the emperor, he was the happiest child of all. He was sure he can grow the most beautiful flower. Ping filled a flower pot with rich soil. He planted the seed in it very carefully. He watered it every day. He couldn't wait to see it sprout, grow, and blossom into a beautiful flower. Day after day passed, but nothing grew in his pot. Ping was very worried. He put new soil into a bigger pot. Then he transferred the seed into the rich black soil. Another 2 months he waited, and still nothing happened. By and by the whole year passed. Spring came, and all the children put on their best clothes to greet the emperor. They rushed to the palace with their beautiful flowers, eagerly hoping to be chosen. Ping was ashamed of his empty pot. He thought the other children would laugh at him because for once he couldn't get a flower to grow. His clever friend ran by holding a great big plant. "Ping," he said, "you're not really going to the emperor with an empty pot, are you? Couldn't you grow a great big flower like mine?" "I've grown lots of flowers, better than yours," Ping said. "It's just this seed that won't grow." Ping's father overheard this and said, "You did your best, and your best is good enough to present to the emperor." Holding the empty pot in his hand, Ping went straight away to the palace. The emperor was looking at the flowers slowly, one by one. How beautiful all the flowers were, but the emperor was frowning and did not say a word. Finally he came to Ping. Ping hung his head down in shame, expecting to be punished. The emperor asked him, "Why did you bring me an empty pot?" Ping started to cry and replied, "I planted the seed you gave me, and I watered it every day, but it didn't sprout. I put it in a better pot with better soil, and it still didn't sprout. I tended it all year long, but nothing grew. So today I had to bring an empty pot without a flower. It was the best I can do." When the emperor heard these words, a smile slowly spread over his face, and he put his arm around Ping. Then he exclaimed to one and all, "I have found him. I have found the one person worthy of being emperor. Where you got your seeds from, I do not know, for the seeds I gave you had all been cooked, so it was impossible for any of them to grow." I admire Ping's great courage to appear before me with the empty truth, and now I reward him with my entire kingdom and make him emperor of all the land. And that is the end, and I absolutely love this story. There are very few stories that I love better than this one, and it just shows that honesty is always the best policy. So anyways, I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Keep going. Our meditation reading is from a real legend, an unknown source. Faith is not ultimately about believing some proposition in spite of the evidence. It is more like living with courage, gratitude, and integrity despite life's inevitable losses. And hope it is not a matter of knowing that everything will turn out all right, either for oneself or even for all of us together on earth. It is more like directing your life toward a point on the horizon beyond which none of us can see, but towards which we all have to journey if there is to be a worthwhile future for any one of us. I now invite you into 3 minutes of meditative silence. I now invite you to use the center aisle to come light a candle for any joy and concern that you are holding in your heart this morning. Bob Allen is a professor emeritus of management at the University of Wyoming, where he served as a department chair, associate dean, and as the university's first conciliator responsible for resolving faculty administrator conflicts. He is co-author of 2 books and numerous academic articles. His interest in labor management relationships as a professor led to a second career as a labor arbitrator. Arbitrating since 1977, he has handled approximately 600 labor disputes. Everybody welcome my dad, Bob Allen.
I need to start with a bit of a disclaimer. As I got into the preparation of the sermon, it was a little heavier than I had chosen it to be, and so I went looking for some humor. So if you go out online, you can find lots of jokes about Unitarians. What I found out is there's almost no jokes about utilitarians. There's simply nothing funny about being a utilitarian, is what I learned. So no humor in this today. Unfortunately. This morning I want to talk about for me, a rather heavy topic, and that's moral decision-making. Moral decision-making refers to the ability to respond to ethical questions in a reasonable and defensible manner. So I'm not going to talk about your decision whether you get vanilla or chocolate ice cream or whether you go fishing or hiking. Those kinds of decisions are personal preferences that usually don't have any moral implications. My focus today will be on ethical questions involving decisions that are morally correct because they conform to some standard that defines what's right or what is good in a particular situation. How such matters are handled says a lot about the type of people we are. Therefore, we need to understand how we make decisions in situations that have moral consequences. As I thought about this, I think I realized that UUs handle moral decision-making quite well, because somewhere along the line, it seems like everybody has a little different story, somewhere along the line they developed an effective moral compass. The phrase moral compass can be viewed as a person's ability to judge what is right or wrong and then to act accordingly. I think there's two elements to a moral compass. Part of it is a set of core values. These are the beliefs that are important to us, like the worthiness of all people, justice, the acceptance of others. The second element of one's moral compass is a system of ethics. An ethical system tells us how to apply our values, our reasoning abilities, our logic, our knowledge, when making decisions that have moral implications. I didn't spend much time worrying about UU values. I think one of the hallmarks of our church is that we tend to attract people with good values. Therefore, the focus of my remarks today will be on ethical systems. The ethical systems we use when applying our values to decisions that have moral consequences. Jason Post, I don't know if you remember this a few years ago, in 2021, Jason, who is a former member of the congregation, presented 2 sermons in which he evaluated 6 different ethical systems. In his analysis, he included 4 teleological ethical systems and 2 deontological systems. A teleological ethical system does not focus on the decision itself. Rather, the correctness of the decision, whether a decision is right or wrong, is determined by the consequences of the decision. That is, the effect of the decision on others. For example, even though stealing another person's property is commonly viewed as being wrong, it could be argued that it is not wrong to steal, say, from a grocery store, if the consequence of doing so was to save the life of a starving person. When judging the morality of the decision, it's the consequence that counts, not the decision itself, the stealing of a person's property. Now, deontological approaches are fundamentally different. They're based on the notion that there are certain universal principles that people are obligated to follow, regardless of the consequences. You know, for example, let's say a person believes that it's wrong to kill a fetus. Therefore, they're likely to believe in strict anti-abortion laws. This position is held, from a deontological perspective, is held even though there are situations in which forcing a mother to carry a fetus until birth could threaten her life. From the deontological perspective, it's the compliance with the rule that's important. It's wrong to kill a fetus. And the consequences for the mother aren't given much in the way of consideration. It's part of the debate that we have going on today. It's based on, by many, on a deontological perspective. Jason went through and evaluated 6 ethical systems in these 2 categories, teleological and deontological, and he concluded that utilitarianism a teleological approach, one emphasizing consequences, was the best. That made sense to me, seemed very reasonable. Why is that? Well, I found it hard to be too critical of an ethical system that seeks to maximize happiness and minimize pain and suffering. Utilitarianism states that the best decision is the one that does the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This notion of best decision is determined by an analysis of the decision's consequences. My guess, this is an approach that is commonly used by many of us. I know I rely on it heavily. We see a problem, we identify alternative solutions to the problem, we think through the consequences, both positive and negative, associated with each of the alternatives, and then we select the decision, select the alternative that has the greatest difference between positive and negative outcomes. This approach roughly approximates utilitarian decision-making. Key point is the focus is on consequences. I think in many, many settings, most settings, utilitarian decision-making serves us quite well. But we have to recognize that there are problems associated with its use. And I guess my basic point today is, by dealing with the problems, we can make better decisions and we can improve the precision, the accuracy of our moral compass. We can make better decisions. Now, many of the problems associated with utilitarianism are what I would consider operational in nature. It's about the implementation, the challenges of implementing utilitarian decision-making. In my mind, these don't go to the heart of utilitarianism. They don't undermine the conclusion that it's the best approach to ethical decision-making. I'd argue that if these operational problems can be handled properly, sound decisions can be made. Now, when I say that, use the phrase operational problems, what I'm referring to are the issues that arise when implementing utilitarian decision-making. For example, it might be in complex situations especially, it may be difficult to identify everybody who's affected by your decision, the stakeholders in the decision. It may be difficult to come up with an exhaustive list of all the alternatives available to you. It may be difficult to come up with an exhaustive list, a thorough list of all the consequences associated with each of the alternatives that you're facing. The thing about thinking through consequences, it's problematic because they haven't happened yet. The consequences are in the future. So you've got to identify what might happen if you implement the decision, and that can be difficult. So operational problems are certainly challenging. There's a whole body of literature out there. I taught a course at, I guess at the university here, called Problem Solving and Decision Making. And we spent a semester talking about different techniques that can be used to make good rational decisions. They're out there, and you can identify those techniques, you can practice those techniques, and you can get better at decision-making by using the techniques. I don't worry about implementation issues. If we're serious about making good decisions, we'll figure out how to do it from an operational perspective. My concern this morning is that the My concerns go to really the heart of the approach, not the problems associated with making it operational. An Italian philosopher has written, when you invent ships, you also invent shipwrecks. This notion, I think, is relevant to utilitarian decision-making. Discussions of utilitarian decision-making usually don't mention that it has a dark side. While the approach can maximize happiness and can minimize pain, it also creates a disadvantaged minority whose interests may be harmed by the decision that's good for this larger group, for the whole. So from a utilitarian perspective, good decisions are those that provide the greatest happiness to the greatest number, but nothing in utilitarian decision-making says you have to make everybody happy. So there's a chance that when you're using utilitarian decision-making, that there will be people, groups, elements of the environment that are actually harmed by the decision. Maybe good for a whole bunch of people, but it's not good for everybody. Let me give you an example. Let's say a community wants to build a highway. And to build that highway that's important to the development of the community, you have to tear down a number of homes. So while the community will benefit, there'll be a group of homeowners who are going to suffer as a result of the highway being constructed. Now, to a utilitarian decision maker, that's okay. Such an outcome is acceptable as long as a greater good is served by the decision that you're making. The expectation, oftentimes it's not stated explicitly, but the implicit expectation is that the homeowners who are disadvantaged by the construction of the highway will simply go along. They'll go along with the decision, even though their interests have been harmed. Utilitarian decision-making is the ship. The creation of a disadvantaged minority is the shipwreck. Now recognize that I'm not saying that utilitarian decision makers go into the process with the intention of hurting anybody. It's reasonable to make decisions that provide for the greatest good. However, here's the problem. We knowingly or unknowingly sacrifice the interests of a few in order to obtain benefits for this larger, greater good, or greater group of people. From this perspective, the creation of a disadvantaged minority is an unintended consequence of the utilitarian decision-making process. I'll argue that such a system is unfair. It's unfair to the disadvantaged minority. And therefore, utilitarianism can't stand alone as an ethical decision-making system. So to me, this notion of this disadvantaged minority, oftentimes unintended, oftentimes not given specific consideration, that's a problem. Let me put a little sharper edge on this notion of creating a disadvantaged minority. I think there's two major concerns. Imposing disadvantages on others appears to be inconsistent with UU principles. Our first principle encourages us to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, and the second principle sets as goals justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Both of these principles, both principles are challenged if we make choices that are likely to be harmful to some of the stakeholders affected by our decision making. A second concern is much more practical. I'll argue that people don't like being harmed by the decisions that affect them that are made by other people. I believe it might be naive to think that the disadvantaged minority will simply acquiesce to the decision simply because it's good for a bunch of other people. Therefore, it might be unrealistic to expect silent acceptance of the decisions made using the utilitarian ethical system. Anger, resistance, resentment are potential responses. In organization settings, disgruntled disadvantaged minority could reduce their productivity, become less cooperative, engage in withdrawal behaviors such as tardiness, absenteeism, or even quitting their jobs. It's consequential, or it can be consequential. And because of that, we really can't ignore it. And in the most discussions of utilitarianism, this dark side receives little or no attention. Given these kind of concerns, I think the argument can be made for trying to avoid such outcomes by injecting greater fairness into the utilitarian decision-making process. Now, normally I don't take a deontological approach to making decisions, this idea that there are rules, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not tell a lie. I buy the notion that the consequences are important. There are times when you might justify telling a lie, that you need to be more nuanced in your thinking than is typically available with a deontological approach. But I'm going to argue for the imposition of a deontological approach to trying to remedy the problem associated with utilitarian decision. How do you make it more fair to the disadvantaged minority? You come up with a rule, and you abide by the rule. And the quality of the decisions that you make will be a function of how well, at least in part, on how well you abide by the rule. Now, a rule, when I thought about this, it could be quite simple. It could be something like, when making utilitarian decisions, we have a rule that says that those in the disadvantaged minority will be treated fairly. Simple, straightforward, and it puts some attention on this group that's largely ignored. And you would apply this rule at the end of the utilitarian decision-making process. You would make your utilitarian decision, and then you would identify who's in the disadvantaged minority, and then you would try and come up with ways to minimize the adverse impact of the decision on them. Nothing in utilitarianism requires that kind of attention for the disadvantaged minority. But I think that the system, that utilitarian decision-making could be much better if you made it more fair, and having such a rule would be useful. You're still making the utilitarian decision. You're still making the decision that provides the greatest good to the greatest number. But then you also take steps over and above that utilitarian requirement, the greatest good for the greatest number, to come up with ways for minimizing the adverse impact on anybody affected by the decision. It makes utilitarian decision more difficult, no doubt about it. But if fairness is important, that's the price you pay. That's what you do. So I'm arguing that the disadvantaged minority is entitled to special consideration, intended to minimize the damage that they're likely to experience as a result of the utilitarian decision. This doesn't mean that you don't adopt the alternative that provides the greatest good to the greatest number. It means that you also recognize that some people are likely to be upset by the decision and that we need to take reasonable steps to assuage that dissatisfaction. The question is, how do you do that? And that becomes a bit more challenging. When I thought about, okay, how do you do that? I was thinking in terms of, there's a whole body of literature within the field of management that looks at organizational justice in organizations, and identifies three major categories of justice. They talk about distributive justice, that's the perceived fairness of the decision that's made. They talk about procedural justice, which is the satisfaction with the procedures that are used to make decisions. And there's something called interpersonal justice, which is perceived treatment that you receive during the decision-making process. And I think that when you start focusing on the disadvantaged minority, you can learn a little bit from each of these areas. With respect to distributive justice, the fairness, the perceived fairness of the decision. In all likelihood, the disadvantaged minority is not going to consider a decision that's harmful to their interests as being very fair. So this is a tough one to deal with. And really what you need to think through is, are there ways to mitigate the adverse reaction that a disadvantaged minority may have in terms of the decision that's made? Let me go back to that example about building a highway. Yeah, sure, people who lose their homes to a construction project, they'll be paid for hopefully a market value for their home. But is that enough to resolve all their dissatisfaction? Are there other things you can do that are reasonable? I'd argue that it might be reasonable to help them with relocation. It might be reasonable to pay the relocation costs in addition to the cost of replacing their home. There are things you can do to decrease the dissatisfaction with the decision that's made. Will it eliminate all the dissatisfaction? Well, you'd like to hope so, but sometimes you can't you don't always get what you want, so you need to do what you can do and think it through. Now, you recognize this step here, because these are folks that are typically ignored in the process, and now we're saying give them special consideration. It may be inconvenient, it may have some cost involved, but you're trying to decrease the unfairness that's created by the utilitarian decision-making system. Procedural justice. Another one that, to my ear, rings a little, it's just a challenging approach to implement. My basic argument is you'll be less dissatisfied if you think the process that led to that decision has been fair. So what can you do during the decision-making process to help ensure that everybody believes that the process itself is fair? So have you identified all the groups likely to be affected by your decision? Have you made sure that everybody's been treated fairly in the deliberations? And one of the common mistakes that are made is that friends of the decision maker get a little bit more consideration than strangers, for example. And so has your decision-making process been fair to everybody? Has everybody been treated equally in the examination of consequences? If there are problems with the decision-making process, And what I'm suggesting is that after your decision is made, you look back on the process that you've used to check to make sure that what you've done is considered fair and reasonable. And if you find out that it hasn't been fair and reasonable, then you need to go back and go through the decision-making process and try and address the problems that arose during the decision-making process. But if you find that there have not been procedural errors, that the process that you used was reasonable, the disadvantaged minority will probably still be upset with the decision, but they'll at least be satisfied that the procedure had been fair, and that's better than them thinking it's unfair. And so you've done the right thing. In a personal justice, the third category in the organizational justice literature concerns how people are treated during the decision-making process. Were the decision makers respectful of all the parties? Did they listen to the disadvantaged minority and their concerns? Did they explain their decision process? And did they do so in an understandable fashion? Was there an appeals mechanism in place that would give people a legitimate way to challenge the decision that had been made? So those are the kinds of interpersonal considerations that you could look at. The objective is to address these kind of issues in order to create a good relationship with the people affected by the decisions, including those in the disadvantaged minority. Trust and respect during the decision-making process can help mitigate hard feelings at the end of the process. The objective of going deontological at the end of utilitarian decision-making is to help ensure that those who are dissatisfied with the decision have been treated more fairly. My assumption is that people who have been treated fairly are more accepting of the decision, even if their interests have been harmed. In conclusion, utilitarianism is a widely used ethical decision-making system that is probably better than the alternatives available. This approach should work effectively for UUs, given our tendency to have effective moral compasses powered by good values, knowledge, logic, reasoning skills. The concern is that utilitarian system can lead to decisions that don't align with our principles, and as a result, the decisions can be harmful to some parties. However, by taking some of the steps I've been talking about this morning, we can address the concerns of the disadvantaged minority and make ethical decisions that are more consistent with our beliefs. This starts by understanding that there are people that are hurt, can be hurt by our utilitarian decisions, and that we need to give them special consideration. They've been hurt as a result of our decisions, and that imposes an obligation to do something about that. That is not required by utilitarian decision-making. We need to respond to their concerns with compassion and a commitment toward minimizing the hurt they've experienced. This can be tough to do. It certainly makes utilitarian decision-making in simple situations is nice and handy and easy to use. In more complex situations, it's very challenging. And what I'm suggesting this morning is makes it even more challenging. So it's tough to add this deontological requirement at the end of the process. But I'll argue that committing to securing more fair results for the disadvantaged minority will make us better decision makers. And in turn, this is likely to improve the accuracy of our moral compass. Thank you.
Alrighty, it is now time to, I don't have a sheet, so baskets are being passed around. Yeah, again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Our closing words are going to be from the Dalai Lama. Joy is the reward of seeking to give joy to others. When you show compassion, when you show caring, when you show love to others, do things for others in a wonderful way, you have a deep joy that you can get in no other way. You can't buy it with money. You can be the richest person on earth, but if you care only about yourself, you will not be happy and joyful. But when you are caring, compassionate, and more concerned about the welfare of others than you are about your own, you suddenly feel a warm glow in your heart because you have, in fact, wiped the tears from the eyes of others away.
Freedom of choice is what you got. Freedom of choice. And if you got it, you don't want it. Seems to be the rule of thumb. Don't be tricked by what you see. You got 2 ways to go. I'll say it again, in the land of the free. Use your freedom of choice. Freedom of choice. In ancient Rome, there was a poem about a dog who found 2 bones. He picked out one, he licked the other. He went in circles, he dropped dead. Freedom of choice is what you got. Freedom from choice is what you want. Freedom of choice. Freedom of choice. Freedom from choice. Freedom from choice.
Maybe you were right. All right. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. We'll see y'all next week. Yeah, we got through it.